This is Mark Edward Cody. We're coming to you today talking to you about some basics of surviving various types of situations. The first portion of this course will be basic preparedness. This is things that in any type of situation you find yourself in, regardless of what it is, there's certain things you need to be aware of, certain things you need to be able to provide for yourself. The basics of food, water, and shelter. It doesn't matter if you're talking about a terrorist attack or if you're talking about aftermath of a hurricane. All of these things will be necessary.
Sounds good to me. Get started.
And this course is based on material that was gleaned from FEMA. If you go to the U.S. government FEMA website, Federal Emergency Management Agency, you will find much of this material. And we would encourage you to go to as many different sources as possible for anything like this. There's a lot of information available on the internet. A lot of it is very good. A lot of it has errors. Now, my background, I've written 7 books. I have a background as a researcher. I've looked into this material extensively, but I would encourage you to double check everything we say here today. Always try to, anything that's of very important issues like this, try to go to multiple sources to get a variety of opinions about what you need to do in a given situation. Then we're going to start out talking about some basic objectives for this section of the course. You need to get informed about the hazards and the emergencies that may affect you and your family. You need to develop an emergency plan, after which you need to collect and assemble a disaster supply kit. There's, again, certain things you may need in any type of a situation. You should have things that you can keep in a backpack that you can easily carry on your person. There are other items you need to have in your car. So we'll just go over some of these things that you may find useful in a given situation and discuss the best ways to have those available. You need to learn where to seek shelter from different types of hazards. There are government shelters available in the aftermath of a hurricane or other events. There are pros and cons of going to these types of areas, and we'll try to talk about and discuss some of those things. You need to practice and maintain your plan. None of this does any good if you can't actually implement it when you need to. It's just one thing to just put stuff aside, have it ready in a bad situation. It's another thing entirely to know how to properly use these things. You need to learn about the hazards that may strike your community, the risks that you face from these hazards, and you need to know your community's plans for warning and evacuation. You can obtain this information from your local emergency management office or from your local chapter of the American Red Cross.
I think an important thing too is to remember to assess yourself first. What are my abilities? What am I weak at? And be honest with yourself so that when it comes time to implement these things, you're not writing the check with your mouth, your butt kicked cash.
Exactly. For instance, a bug-out bag, a backpack with emergency supplies in it. If you've got a 120-pound bag that's full of everything you could possibly need in any situation, that's great. But if you discover that you can't carry it more than a couple of blocks, it's not going to do you any good.
Be honest with yourself. That's the main thing. Look at yourself, assess yourself, and be honest.
But again, I mean, even if you've got a pack that's larger than you can carry, one of the things that you can do is use one of the modular packs where you can remove portions of that pack, and if necessary, the larger pack, you can store it, you can hide it away someplace to come back to it a later date.
Right.
Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is natural hazards. We'll get into this a little bit later on when we go into the individual types of situations you may face. Today's video will be mostly on things that you would do in any situation, but in future videos we need to consider some of the natural hazards that you may face with your family. You've got floods, hurricanes, thunderstorms and lightning, winter storms, extremes of cold and heat. All of these things can go together. We're filming from Florida. We've had a number of hurricanes in the last couple of years, and a lot of people have found out firsthand how unprepared they are. Simply going without electricity for an extended period of time can be very uncomfortable. Now, it makes you wonder how the last 5,000 years of human civilization people were able to survive without air conditioning and electric light and the things that we're used to now.
Blows my mind, but it does get archaic, gets crazy. So, yeah, assess your situation, understand what's going on, but don't be afraid to look at the nasty stuff, because that's how you're gonna be prepared.
You know, and a lot of people don't realize it was 1925 before even half of the households in the United States had electric light. So this is something that people have got by with without for most of human history. But the thing is, if you live your life without electricity, you've already made provisions for having food that doesn't need refrigerated, for having means of transportation, for having lighting in your home and such as that. Nobody alive today is used to living that way. So it's a very alien world for us to consider going for an extended period of time without electricity.
Right.
Okay, and then there's other areas, again, we're filming from Florida, there's other things that we don't really have to worry about too much here. If you're in California or Hawaii or other places, this is maybe an issue for you. Earthquakes, volcanoes, landslides, and the debris that comes from the landslides, tsunamis, fires, wildfires, California, Hawaii, a lot of these places have to deal with these other things.
Right.
There's technological hazards. You've got blackouts and brownouts. I often talk about the thin veneer of civilization. You know, everyone thinks that we live in a civilized world because we've got electricity. But if you look at a major metropolitan area like New York City, if they have a power outage for a couple of hours, it's pandemonium.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine if you had an electromagnetic pulse nuclear weapon go off on the eastern seaboard. You could be months, if not a year or more, without electricity. Imagine a huge portion of the United States with no electric light. It would be a zombie apocalypse situation. It would be terrible. So you've got the blackouts and the brownouts and all the things that go along with that. You've got the spillage of hazardous materials. If you're close to a highway, if you're close to a railroad track, there's always the possibility of a train derailment, of a truck crashing and spilling dangerous materials all over the place. Nuclear power plants. Everybody remembers the famous 3 Mile Island meltdown.
Well, we have a Clorox plant right here that would be very, very dangerous if something happened there.
Right. And then you've got the shutdown of the infrastructure, the shutdown of the transportation network, and all of that could be affected by any of these things we've been talking about, anything from a hurricane to an EMP attack by terrorists. If you have the trucks are no longer running, they're no longer bringing new materials to the grocery stores and such as that, a lot of people have estimated that the nation is probably about 3 days away from starvation.
Right.
And in today's world, post 9/11 world, terrorism is a big thing to consider. Terrorists have been known to use explosions, explosive devices. There's a number of biological threats, anthrax, botulism. There's a number of things that could be weaponized and used against the population.
And I think that the thing that people don't realize is that where we're uncomfortable, where we're totally vulnerable, that chaos creates great opportunities for the people that are ready to take advantage of it. So the bad guys are going to be worse when times are worse for us. So we have to be ready for that.
Various chemical threats, crude nuclear weapons. You don't necessarily have to have nuclear fission, your normal conventional atomic bomb, to do damage with nuclear materials.
Right.
The so-called dirty bomb, if someone just had access to high explosives and access to nuclear materials, radioactive materials, that alone could do a great deal of damage. And of course, in this world of school shootings and active shooter situations, it seems like something like that happens on a weekly basis now. And people are just not prepared for it.
No.
Again, you can go to FEMA, you can go to various government web pages. Most states have a web page with a disaster preparedness, with an active shooter preparedness site that gives you information. Try to go to all these different places you can to get this information that can help you to survive these situations.
You can go to your local sheriff's department most of the time, and they'll supply you with an officer or a deputy to teach you how to avoid those kinds of situations
Right.
and what to do in the
Now, the Polk County Sheriff's Office a couple
Very-
months ago did a class on active shooter situations.
Very active.
And most of your your sheriff's departments in any given area will do there.
Exactly, especially in today's world.
And of course, there's what a lot of people consider to be more far-fetched things that could happen: insurrections, invasions, rioting, public unrest, hostile government actions such as gun confiscation, citizen internment, foreign invasions. And people say to themselves, well, that could never happen here. Well, it's happened every place else in the world in most of human history.
It happened here.
It happened
In
here, but
Louisiana,
the citizen
when-
internment, remember when they locked up all of the Japanese during World War II?
And where was it, Mississippi, that they had floods? New Orleans.
New Orleans.
And they confiscated citizens' weapons that were actually kept to defend their property, and themselves were confiscated by the government in a so-called "we're going to protect you" situation. That's impossible. When there's water everywhere, chaos everywhere, the police cannot be everywhere.
Then of course there's a lot of small-scale disasters. And we should be aware of the fact that regardless of the scale of the event, if it's happening to you, if it's happening to someone you care about, it's a disaster. A car accident, a severe physical injury, falling downstairs, a child being poisoned, someone choking in a restaurant. All of these things are disasters for the people that are involved in the situation. And there's ways you can minimize the danger of these things by preparing for them and having a plan of action if any of these things happen.
That's the key word, is taking action instead of wondering and worrying. And we live in this lawsuit place that we live in today, and everybody's, I won't say everybody, most people are worried about getting involved, and a person's life is at risk. You don't have time for that. You have to get
Right. And there are laws in place, so-called Good Samaritan laws, that gives you legal protection if you try to do something like do the Heimlich maneuver on someone, and in so doing you break a rib or something like that.
Right.
It happens very commonly. It's happened so much that they did write legislation to protect people that are doing their best to help someone and wind up hurting them in the course of trying to do so.
Yeah.
Now again, you can go to FEMA, www.fema.gov, and you can get a lot of the information that's available in all of these areas for how to deal with these situations. You need to stay informed about current events and potential impending disasters. You should monitor national and local news, either through TV, radio, the internet, your mobile device. Can you imagine what it was like just 100 years ago or so, when a hurricane showed up at your door and you had absolutely no prior warning to it? Today we have the advantage, we normally know at least a week in advance before there's any chance of a hurricane hitting us.
And I was actually alive at a time when you didn't get the news like that. So this is a double-edged sword. It's all coming at you so fast, it's hard to absorb, and everybody's competing to be number one instead of being the guy that tells the truth right now, and somebody you can really count on. So take the time to pick out the stations that are close to you that you trust.
And there is so much information out there now. There's news, there's fake news, there's fear-mongering, and we don't want to encourage people to be in the mindset of just being terrified that terrible things are going to happen at any given moment, and you need to sell everything and go buy a bomb shelter in the middle of the desert somewhere in the side of a mountain and be the full-blown survivalist. You don't have to do that to be able to survive a bad situation. It's very simple. Basically what you have to do is think about the worst possible thing that could happen in a given situation, and then think about the best way to survive that situation.
And understand that any situation, whether it's an active shooter situation, a storm situation, whatever the case might be, if you're not educated, you're going to be struggling for information at a time when it's not going to be available. You have to prepare for this stuff. People used to say, Stoney, you're paranoid. And I said, I am the P word, but it's not paranoid. I'm prepared. And that's the key. We don't want anybody to panic, but we want you to be prepared and be ready, period.
You remember the emergency broadcast system? A lot of people don't realize that's actually no longer the name of the emergency system that's in effect. The emergency broadcast system is sometimes called the emergency action notification system. It was an emergency warning system that was used in the United States between 1963 to 1997. Before doing the research for this section of the course, I had no idea it had been out of use for that long. But it was 1997 when they did away with that. All of us that are older remember this is a test to the emergency broadcast system, this is only a test. And that always was right after they give this terrible screeching siren sound that would scare you to death when you heard it. You didn't know if you should get under a table or...
They still have an alert system, NOAA, and places like Stella still have an alert system, mainly weather. But yeah, just get yourself a good radio and pay attention when you need to. And make sure that if it needs batteries, that you have batteries, because you won't have a place to plug it in. So it's all the little tiny things. What we're trying to do, I think what Mark is trying to put together here, is a little bit of everything to help you understand that, yes, I have to be prepared. Yes, I'm going to have to spend some money. Yes, I'm going to have to pay attention to what's going on. I'm going to have to study. We can't teach you everything. All we can do is put all these tidbits out there and hope that you pick some of them up. That's what's important.
So I think the reason they did away with the emergency broadcast system is because the technology just simply outgrew it. The broadcast system, as the name implies, they would broadcast something either through the TV or through the airwaves to the radio stations. Now with our mobile devices, they have updated the system. It's now called the Emergency Alert System, or EAS. This can address the entire nation in a very short notice any type of a grave threat or national emergency. You should find out if your local radio and TV stations participate in this. But if you've got a mobile device, a smartphone, as most people do these days, the EAS will go directly to that. The Wireless Emergency Alert System is an essential part of America's emergency preparedness plan. Since it was launched in 2012, this system has been used more than 40,000 times for various uses, from anything from oncoming weather events to missing children and other critical situations. And again, this goes right to your cell phone. How does it work? A pre-authorized national, state, or local government authority can send these alerts to your mobile device in a particular area. If there's evacuation orders or shelter in place due to weather, a terrorist threat, chemical spill, anything like this, you can be alerted through your phone. And the default setting on your phone is going to be to receive all of these messages. You don't have to sign up for it. This system allows the government to automatically send these alerts to anyone that has these devices, has the smartphones. What do the alerts deliver? It's only critical information in emergency situations. Consumers can receive only 3 types of alerts. It's either an emergency alert that's directly issued from the president, an alert that's involving imminent threats to safety or life or limb, a hurricane coming in, a tornado warning, something to that effect, or Amber Alerts, a missing child. Now, can you block these from your phone? Certain parts of it you can. The Amber Alerts, a lot of people turn that off because unfortunately they go off on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Children are taken or go missing on such a common basis. Your phone goes off all the time if you don't turn this off. Participating wireless carriers can often allow the subscribers to turn off the Amber Alerts, although you cannot block emergency alerts that are issued by the president. So if we're having an alien invasion and the president's trying to tell you about it, that's going to come right through, regardless of what type of settings you have on your phone. Can you count on the government authority to notify you of an impending disaster? Not always.
Not this government.
Remember Pearl Harbor? There's a lot of conspiracy theories out there. Either they didn't see the threat coming, or they did see the threat coming and they didn't tell the people that needed to know.
Because it would feed a particular political agenda or whatever the case might be. And I think what we have to understand is You know, the people that are gonna be affected by these things are not gonna be the super rich, they're already prepared. Most of them have everything they need to take care of what they think in their mind is a bad situation. The problem with most people without a lot of money is they're afraid to spend that little bit they've got on this preparedness, this stuff. I'll take care of it when it happens. But what you don't understand when you're, and if you've been in a situation like we have, when you're at a gas station and the line is 2 miles long trying to get fuel because there's no power and everybody's using a generator, you better stockpile some of this stuff. Is it fun? No. Is it comfortable? No. I just had to give away 60 gallons of gas from last year because I didn't want to use it this year. June 1st, I'm filling the tanks up again and I'm getting ready. I don't want to have to do that. I want to spend the money, but it's better that I do.
Yeah, and most of this stuff is things that you can use in the course of your regular life.
Exactly.
Like your emergency supplies. Get things that you like to eat anyway.
Yeah.
You know, when you go to the store to buy some dried beans, instead of buying 1 pack, buy 2 packs and put 1 pack back for emergency situations.
Exactly. And medication, people don't understand. Have a conversation with your doctor about what medication do I take right now that I cannot do without. I'm not talking about vitamins, I'm talking about your life, those vital medications that you need. Have a conversation I did with my doctor and I'm taking care of it. It's important to put a little bit of that away, even if it's just a month's supply, so that you can at least live through that time period. It's longer than a month, you're in the wrong place anyway. And, get yourself along for that little bit of time.
And there's alternatives to a lot of different types of medicine.
Exactly.
We've had the discussion before about your antibiotics.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize that antibiotics that are marketed and sold to be used by tropical fish are exactly the same antibiotics that are given in the human pharmacy. Amoxicillin, a number of other things like this. You have to have a prescription to get it if you're getting it as supposed to be for human consumption. But you can buy it from an online or a local pet store that sells it for the use of tropical fish. And you can buy a huge bottle of the stuff for a fraction of the cost that it would cost.
And again, when you have the conversation with them, not the things that I need, the things that I can't do without. And that might be out of 6 medications, maybe there's only 2 that really are vital that you can't get anywhere else. Those are the ones that you concentrate on, and the other ones you wean yourself off the best you can. And just understand, know what your medications do.
Now, certain types of events can cause the shutdown of various forms of communication. We mentioned the EMP, the electromagnetic pulse. If that happens, not going to be any cellular, there's not going to be any TV, there's not going to be any radio. Most of your cars that were made after the 1970s are not going to run because the electronic components that make them run are going to be fried by the EMP. The telephone service is often interrupted in the area that sustains massive damage. Hurricanes, they blow down the power lines. You probably experience the same thing I do in this area. We've got a lot of major highways close by, and every time somebody runs over a couple of telephone poles, runs over a couple power poles,
Yeah.
you're out of communication, you're out of electricity if you don't have alternatives. Just last week, over by our main road here, a dump truck took out 3 telephone poles, and I was probably 7 hours with electricity.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be some major event to facilitate having some alternative means of lighting your house or taking care of issues that you
Even
need to do
communication, a small radio, a 10-meter radio, you plug it into your truck or you plug it into a battery at your house and you got communications with the people that are in your network.
Right.
At least with those people that are in your network. And you don't have to communicate with the world, but the people that are close to you, family that are in your network, you should communicate with.
And a lot of the technology that we consider to be outdated, CB radios,
Exactly.
walkie-talkies, that sort of thing. If you have a situation where the cell towers are down, those things suddenly become very valuable again.
Our whole subdivision uses radios. In a storm, everybody in our subdivisions can use those little tiny, inexpensive radios and communicate with each other. We've got some older people in our neighborhood that couldn't get out and couldn't do some things, and the rest of the people got together and helped. That's all it takes. Use your head.
And something else a lot of people don't think about is the necessity of developing relationships with people in other areas that are not close to you. You need reliable people that can get firsthand information from if there's a widespread event. Remember New Orleans, when the hurricane hit there, I had friends in New Orleans that I was over a year before I could contact them because the towers were down.
Yep.
And they later on got other numbers from other areas, and you just lost contact with those people. So you need to have alternative ways of contacting people, and if there's something happening in your area that someone further away may not know about, we may have no internet, no phones, no television, but if you get a ham radio and you can talk to your cousin in Georgia or something like that,
Exactly.
they may be able to tell you what's going on, whereas locally we just don't know. Okay, NOAA, N-O-A-A, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They have the NWR, the NOAA Weather Radio. It's a good source of information for all these meteorological events like hurricanes, tornadoes, flooding, that sort of thing.
I have one in my house. It's very, very important. Here in Florida especially.
In certain situations, the best thing to do is evacuate, and no one ever wants to do that. Every time there's an evacuation order anywhere for any reason, there's always going to be people that just refuse to go because all your stuff is in your house. You spent your life accumulating your stuff, and you don't want to leave it for the damages that are incurred by the storm or looters or what have you. You want to stay where you feel comfortable and protect your stuff. But there's nothing in your house that's worth your life or the life of your families. But there's certain times when you need to really consider evacuating.
And there are times, this is again a double-edged sword, when things get really bad, well, you should stay in place, especially people with limited mobility, because you're going to clog the system up. And when you get out there in the world, and everybody that can be mobile is mobile, I wouldn't expect, because I am not mobile, I wouldn't expect them to try to save me when it's time to save themselves and their family. So you got to use your head. Again, assess who you are, be honest with yourself.
When community evacuations become necessary, local officials are going to provide the information through the various forms of media. In some circumstances or other warning methods, such as sirens, telephone calls, they can use all these things. Additionally, there may be circumstances under which you and your family feel threatened or endangered and you need to leave your home, school, or workplace to avoid the impending situation. The amount of time that you have to leave will depend on the hazard. If it's a hurricane, you may have a week's notice. But again, everybody always wants to wait to the very last minute. Hurricanes are notorious for turning at the very last moment before they hit you, so a lot of people wait it out, and as a result, you either get stuck in place or you have all of the major roads are just swamped with people trying to get out too late.
And living where we live, we're lucky. We live in the central part of Florida. We're really very lucky. It's high ground. It's a pretty safe area, and so we're really pretty lucky. You live on the coast, you have to pay attention to those evacuation orders and get out of there now, because later is too late.
And it's just always the toss of the dice. I mean, remember a couple hurricanes ago they thought it was going to hit the coast, and everybody from the coast came here, and the hurricane hit us instead of where the people evacuated from. So sometimes you just have to make an informed decision and hope it works out best for you.
Mom knows best, and when Mother Nature is kicking butt, it's best to pay attention.
So what is the likelihood of an evacuation event? They actually happen very frequently. Hundreds of times every year, there's transportation, industrial accidents, harmful substances are released, people in that area have to evacuate. Places where there's a lot of major train tracks going through, moving industrial chemicals and such as that. You have a chlorine spill or some other dangerous chemical, an entire neighborhood may need to evacuate. And of course every year along the Gulf and the Atlantic coast, we've got the hurricane situation where they tell you to leave and you leave, and then the hurricane turns and goes back out to sea, and you feel like you've wasted your time and your money. But if it hits and you don't evacuate,
Yeah.
you know, it can be a very bad situation. You need to ask your local authorities about emergency evacuation routes. Find out all of this stuff in advance. Just about any city, municipalities, county, almost all of them are going to have information on the best evacuation routes for a given situation.
Another thing that's important, while I'm thinking about it, is you are not going to have access to that GPS
Exactly.
a lot of the time.
You got to have a hard copy.
Get a map out. Read a map. Have a plan. Sit down with somebody that understands north, south, east, and west, and can do that no matter what the weather is, no matter what's going on. They understand where they are, where they're going. They have a plan, and it's all laid out for you. Don't count on all that electronic stuff. It's not going to get you where you gotta go.
There's a lot of things that you should keep in your car all the time, but a road atlas of the state, the country, and a folding map of your local
Yep.
area are all very important things
Yep.
to have. Even if you've lived in the same place all your life, a local map would be a good thing to be able to look at if you're on foot or if your gas is limited and roadways are knocked down or you're trying to find alternate routes.
Right.
You have a hurricane come through, you have telephone poles, trees, all sorts of things blocking the way you would normally go someplace.
Exactly.
So you may need to find a way to get from point A to point B that you've never used before.
And practice. Look at the map, read the map, understand different areas. All that stuff is important.
Okay, let's go over some basic evacuation guidelines. And FEMA uses a platform on their websites. They'll say, always do this. And in a particular situation, these are things you should always do. And then they'll say, if time permits, these are things you do. You know, the always is do it or die. The if time permits is, well, you may be able to save your stuff or make the situation better for yourself if you have time to do it. But don't do these additional things if they tell you get out right now. You know, if you've got a tsunami coming in, you don't want to take the time to turn off the gas in your house or something like
They want to
that.
buy a boat.
It all depends on the situation. And there's a lot of things that all of us are bad about doing. Everybody from time to time waits till that gas gauge is all the way over, just completely out of gas before you pull into the gas station. You're in a hurry, there's a lot of stuff you need to do, you'll get gas in the morning. But what happens if in the morning there's a gas spill
Exactly.
and you got to get out right now and there's no time to stop for fuel?
And gas stations use electricity to
Yeah.
pump the gas. So you've got to understand that as well.
So you need to keep a full tank of gas in your car, especially if an evacuation is probable. Everybody in Florida has experienced, you know, just before a storm is about to come in, there's always a line at the gas stations because they're at the last minute. Everybody's like, oh crap, I need gas.
Right.
You know, if you see that there's a front forming off the coast of Africa, that's the best time to go ahead and
Yeah, go ahead and
make
get
sure
some
that
gas.
your car is full. Don't wait till it's 90 miles out off the
It's in
coast.
Tampa. Yeah.
Try not to get below a half a tank of gas, just as a general rule all the time. And again, all of us are guilty of this. We let it get down too low. But if we just train ourselves, when you get to a half a tank, go up and fill up right then.
I'm a freak when it comes to the gas tank. Because of my mobility, I'm always freaky about that. So I always make sure I've got gas. And I've got that 60 gallons. If a storm does happen and something happens with fuel, I have 60 gallons of extra fuel at my house. So you throw that in a little trailer I got behind the house and go to work and do what you want to do.
Yeah, try to have at least 5 gallons of gas. If you're in a situation where you can store it someplace safely, if you live in an apartment or something like that, you can't really store the gas in your car. It's not safe to bring it into your home.
Keep
But
it
if you're a
good.
homeowner, if you've got some place where you can store that stuff safely, have at least 5 gallons.
A good metal can that seals tight, because those plastic things leach a little bit of. What people don't understand, it's not the liquid that catches fire, it's the gas. It's the gas
vapors.
itself, the vapors that catch fire. So yeah, get a good can. Don't again spend the money now, and you'll be able to take care of yourself later.
If you have time in a given situation where you need to evacuate, try to gather your disaster supply kit. Again, certain situations, the tsunami is rolling in, no time to grab anything. Uh, most events that are going to take place, you'll have a little bit of time, and if you don't have to take an hour or two to get your stuff together, if you just got it ready where you can pick it up and go, it's not going to spend a lot of extra time to be able to get some supplies to take with you. You need to make transportation arrangements with friends or local government officials if you don't already own a reliable vehicle. Some people have very small compact vehicles that, you know, if you have 6 inches of water, they're not going to do too good. We live in an area where just about everybody's got a 4-wheel drive that's 10 foot off the ground, so we're probably going to be okay.
And we're the ones that really don't need it, so.
Yeah,
But
Stoney's got a little bitty
A
vehicle.
little tiny car, but
Yeah, if you have something like a Hummer like Stoney has, or an SUV, 4-wheel drive, you're probably going to be a lot better off than the compact car owner if you're trying to get away from a flood or a hurricane when the streets are covered with water.
plus these new electric cars and stuff, you gotta pay attention. What are the rules to that? I have a, whatever, if I have a Prius or something that's electric, how deep can I drive through? Not a normal car capacity. So you have to understand that's electronic. Do I short everything out when I drive through 3 feet of water, 2 feet of water? What's the limit? And that's, I guarantee you nobody's thinking about that.
Yeah, and you know, as we try to make cars lighter and lighter so they get better gas mileage, they tend to be made out of materials that are less safe,
Mhm.
and because the overall vehicle is lighter, it's much more susceptible to being washed away by running water.
Exactly.
And if you don't have a 4-wheel drive vehicle, make friends with someone who does, that you can depend on to help you in a situation. If time permits, make sure that you're wearing sturdy shoes and clothing to provide some protection. You need to have long pants, long sleeve shirts, and some sort of a cap or a hat. You need something that ideally will cover most of your body to protect you from sun or sand or debris or any of the type of environmental hazards you might face, in addition to extremes of heat and cold. And you need to keep these items in your vehicle, especially ladies, if you're going someplace on a regular basis in your car wearing a dress and high-heeled shoes. Think about how far you can walk down the side of the road in your high-heeled shoes before it starts becoming a very unpleasant experience. Everyone should have good walking shoes in their cars at all times. And if you're going someplace where you're wearing some sort of very comfortable shoes in normal situations, like flip-flops or Crocs or something like that, again, think about if you have to walk a long way in those. You need to have a spare pair of socks in your car, good hiking socks, and a good pair of walking shoes. You should always listen to battery-powered radios during your crisis if you don't have access to your plug-in electrical devices. If your smartphone is down, very often, if you've got one of these wind-up weather radios or something like that, you can still get your emergency information that way. And many of these weather radios, you can get them from Amazon.com. You can get them at Home Depot or Lowe's. They're available everywhere. They're usually $30, $40 at most. And the best ones have various forms of power. They'll have a solar panel where they can charge through the light of the sun.
A lot of solar stuff.
They'll have a magneto where you just crank it and it will work. And then, of course, they've got a plug-in where you can charge the rechargeable battery on it. So you want something that you don't necessarily have to be able to put more 9-volt batteries or whatever into for it to work. Something that's got a replenishable power supply. If you have time, you need to close and lock the doors and windows in your house. You need to unplug any type of electrical equipment, radios, televisions, small appliances. Remember, in a lot of events, when the power is coming and going before it goes out completely, there may be power surges in your line.
Right.
And if you've got a several $1,000 computer system, you can save yourself that expense by just unplugging it and protecting it from that system, that surge coming through. Surge protectors help, but if the incoming surge is strong enough, or if there's multiple surges, that may not protect your equipment. Leave your freezers and your refrigerators plugged in to save your food, unless there's a risk of flooding and the ensuing rising water shorting out the device and burning down your house. It's the irony of disasters that very often flooding and things burning down go together, but that does happen.
Yeah, nasty stuff comes from floods, besides the critters. You know, just the water itself is very, very
Yeah, I mean,
dangerous.
in Florida, we have to deal with displaced alligators and snakes and all kind of creatures that are looking for high ground also. You should always gather your family and go without delay if you're instructed to do so. Delay in certain situations can cost you your life. You need to just get out as quickly as possible if the people that are in the know of what's going on tell you to do so. And remember, in certain situations, you may not know or they may not be telling you all the information. And in some situations, the government may say, evacuate now, and they don't give you the full reasons for doing that. They may know something you don't, and they're not sharing that information because they're trying to prevent more widespread panic. If you have time, you need to let other people know where you're going. If you still have access to communications, call a friend or a family member out of state and say, hey, you know, we're going to such and such place. We've got a hotel, or we're going to get a hotel in this county, 50 or 60 miles away or what have you. So if something happens, people know how to contact you. You need to leave early enough to avoid being trapped by severe weather or other travel restraints. You need to follow recommended evacuation routes. You know, under certain circumstances, if the situation has not got too bad as of yet, you might be able to use an alternative route and be able to save yourself the congestion of the interstates or
I did that in Canada once and ended up in Chicago. So
yeah,
you
there's
gotta,
that. You gotta be careful.
you gotta be careful.
If you're using a shortcut, make sure it's a good shortcut, that you've got
Exactly.
good intel that it's still open. Be alert for washed out roads and bridges and try to avoid driving through flooded areas. Now, many of us that grew up in the South and here in the swamps in Florida, I've seen people drive four-wheel drives, and I've personally driven a four-wheel drive through rivers where the water literally came up over the hood and still got through fine. But then I've also seen the big monster trucks literally get washed downstream
Yep.
because they had so much air in their tires and so much mass to the vehicle, the running water just swept them away.
If it's running water, you have to
Yes,
be
I have.
really careful. It's dangerous. If it's stationary, that's another situation. But if it's running, especially if it's running across, you have to be really careful.
And remember, in all these situations, never say never. There's some things we'll tell you in this video, or FEMA will tell you never do this. Well, you have to look at what the alternative to never is.
Right.
If it's like, well, okay, if we can't get away from the Sharknado unless
Right.
we go across this running water, you know, I mean, maybe in that situation,
Exactly.
you need to take the chance.
And another thing that's really, really important is watch the word expert. When experts give you advice, and we're not claiming to be experts. I'm not an expert of anything except for my own personal life. And sometimes I'm not quite sure about that. But my dad told me when I was young, the definition of the word expert. Expert is a drift under pressure. So if we understand that sometimes the guy that's talking and knows everything and has all these degrees and everything can't kick in the logical part of what's going on in the world, so you have to study. You have to listen to everything, pull out what works for you, and use that. And don't be afraid to talk to somebody that knows a little bit more about a subject than you. It's very, very important to pay attention to everything, sort out what works for you.
One of the keys to survival is developing creative and critical thinking. When I studied logic in college, that was the title of one of the textbooks that we used, creative and critical thinking.
So important.
You need to be able to analyze the situation from the data that's available, and then you need to utilize your creativity to be able to find workarounds from situations that, you know, it may be an orthodox way of doing things, but in a given situation, you need to be creative with the situation and the assets that you have available to you.
And don't set your limits until you personally test your limits. People have been limiting me my whole life. Don't let people convince you you can't or you won't or there's no way. If your mind wants to survive, if your body wants to survive, and you're resolved to that situation, that's what's going to happen, then you will. If you quit, that's the end of everything. So you have to Understand your own limitations, know who you are, be honest with who you are, but don't be afraid to push the limits a little bit.
Another consideration, if you have children that are school age, you need to see if there's specific school emergency plans that your child's school has got in place. Ask the school to communicate how they're going to communicate with families if something happens. Make sure you understand what they have available at the school. Do they have adequate food, water, and other basic supplies if the child has to shelter in place there? Find out if the school is prepared to shelter in place if the situation arises, and where they plan to go if they have to evacuate the children. In cases where schools institute procedures to shelter in place, you may not be permitted to drive to the school to pick up your children. Even if you go to the school, the doors may be locked to keep your children safe. You need to monitor local media outlets for announcements about changes in school openings and closings, and follow the directions of emergency location officials. For more information on developing emergency preparedness plans for schools, you should log into the U.S. Department of Education at www.ed.gov/emergency plan. That's ed.gov/emergency plan.
See, and I guarantee you that's something nobody's thought about.
No. There's so much information available. Now, FEMA gets a bad rap. FEMA has done some horrible stuff. They've misused the assets that have been available to them, but they do have a lot of good information. Some of it I don't agree with, and again, that's why I say you should get your information from a variety of sources and question everything. But the government does have a huge amount of very good information available to you for any type of event you might deal with. In your workplace, you need to look at it also. If you're the employer, you need to make sure that your workplace has a building evacuation plan, and make sure you practice it with your people on a regular basis. You need to take a critical look at your heating, your ventilation, your air conditioning system, make sure it's secure. You need to think about what to do if your employees can't go home. In some situations, you may have to stay where you're at, be it at school or at work, and it may be for a couple of hours or a couple of days. You need to make sure that you've got appropriate supplies on hand.